we have taken a lot more, especially over the past 5 to 6 years, of like a team first mindset. If we take care of our team, the patients will be fine. Like I'm very, very confident about that. But I'm not confident that if we had a customer service or customer first or customer is always right mindset, that we would be in the same situation.
Kick it.
Hi, welcome back to Strata Stories. Today, Paul Singh sits down with Josh Funk, CEO and founder of Rehab to Perform, to talk about what it really takes to grow and scale a physical therapy brand. Josh shares how Rehab to Perform expanded from a single location to 17 clicks across the DMV and what had to change along the way to support that kind of growth. Together, they break down how culture and retention becomes a competitive advantage, what scaling actually demands from business operations, why clear onboarding processes matter than the tools, and how an entrepreneurial mindset fuels sustainable growth. Let's get started.
From my perspective, I feel like you're all over the place. I see your content everywhere. You guys are crushing in that way. But I would love like maybe a 2-minute intro on Rehab to Perform. What's like the 2-minute background on what you guys do? Because well, let me start there. Give me for anybody that's listening to this or watching this right now and somehow has not seen you online already. What's the deal with Rehab to Perform?
I would say Rehab to Perform is where healthcare meets fitness. We have a performance-focused approach to PT. It's for active adults, competitive athletes, people becoming more active, and it provides them with solutions to recover from injury and to build their movement health. Our approach focuses on movement health through the lens of competency, capacity, and conditioning, ideally putting people in a position where they're not just thinking about pain reduction, but they're in a situation where they're ready to perform and ideally ready to perform for life.
Okay, so I love this, and I mean this with all the respect in the world. You've definitely done that a couple times.
A few times. It's funny, I just did a recent brand refresh. So we've been much more intentional about words and phrases and trying to just get more clear. We're 11 years in at this point in time, and you add people. We were only 4 offices up until July of 2021, which doesn't seem like that far away, but we felt very, very confident with what we had going on. We'll have 17 by mid-year this year. Our footprint also, I always think it's important to at least mention it's bigger than most places that you might typically associate with, a little bit more of like a retail footprint. The average office for us is somewhere between 3,500 to 4,500 square feet. So, it's a little bit bigger than many PT offices. But yeah, through adding people, through adding locations, you're always playing the messenger game with the cups and the strings, and people are hearing it. And we just got to a certain point where we're like, we got to do a brand refresh. Like, we need to be very, very clear with who we are, what we do, what our value add is, and how we solve people's problems. So yeah, a little bit of practice there.
And I think this is obvious in your LinkedIn profile, but to be clear to everybody else, you are a DPT as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I was like that part of the phase where like you didn't have any options, right? The master's was getting pretty much washed out.
And out of curiosity, was business like a minor for you, or like where did all this business knowledge come from for you?
Gosh, I think 2 places. One, I've kind of always had it. And I say that just because I've always wanted to work, and I've always kind of had like an inherent like ability to understand there's a relationship between setting expectations and delivering value, and then expecting some kind of like reciprocity on that, obviously payment. I mowed lawns growing up. I taught swim lessons. I did the newspaper. Eventually, lacrosse ended up being my sport, and I did camps, clinics, lessons. My first business actually was a company called Lax Factory, and I ran that from 2011 to 2018. So the first 3 or 4 years of R2P, I'm doing 2 businesses. I can tell people a lot of reasons why not to diversify, at least like when you're not entrepreneurially mature. And I was not entrepreneurially mature at that point in time.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I would say, my mom is in sales. I think salespeople inherently are like internal, like entrepreneurs, right? There's an entrepreneurial component to being a marketing and especially a sales professional. And just seeing her biz dev impact in a wide variety of different settings, I think rubbed off on me.
That's awesome. Obviously, we can't cover everything in 45 minutes or so here, but now I'm curious. You talked about this idea that R2P is 11 years old, and I think you said that up until 2020, you guys were 4 locations. Now you're at 17 locations, and we're recording this at the beginning of 2026, right? So obviously, don't share anything you can't share or don't want to share, but in a nutshell, what was the pivotal point there? What was it about 2020 where you said, I'm 4 is not enough. I want something. Was it an actual conscious decision? Was it a great location popped up? What was the inflection point there?
It was the validation of, and for anybody who's opened your second office is the hardest. I'm going to say that until I'm done doing this thing. And I talk to a lot of people. The second is usually the hardest, right? The first one, you're there, you're going through the ebbs and flows in your first office, but you don't realize until you have to split time just how people driven your business is. And I realized when opening a second office how people driven R2P was and how it needed to become more of a process centric company. Um, we opened the third office and it went so much better. And we opened the fourth office, it went so much better. And prior to the pandemic, we were actually so confident that we signed our fifth lease. Pandemic hits, we work with the landlord. We're like, we don't want to open this in 2020. There's so much uncertainty. We don't feel comfortable. And then we actually get through 2020 and we're profitable. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, this seemed like the worst possible thing. I'm having to furlough people. You're doing policy and procedure changes at all the different offices, changing at a moment's notice, doing everything that you can to keep the place going, provide people jobs, keep everybody safe, follow, your different jurisdiction, specific policy changes, and we're profitable.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, you're like, all right, we clearly have something here that even in a doomsday scenario, as a lot of people would have, described that time period as from a business standpoint, in-person service driven business, let's freaking hit it. So, we opened the fifth office in July of 2021. We opened another office that year, 2 the following year, and then we've just kind of been rolling this year. We'll probably open it'll be at least 4. We'll see how the back half of the year looks like. But we're starting to get a little bit more confident. Cash flows get a little bit more mature when you have a lot more open and mature offices than you have immature offices. And we are a company that is entirely independent. We're entirely private. We haven't opened ourselves up to the VC or private equity firms. So we're in a situation where again, I'm very, very optimistic about the direction we're headed. And the DMV, I mean, you could only be so many places, and in about 2 to 3 years, we'll kind of see where we're at and what the plan is from there.
Well, it's interesting. You talked about, I love that phrase you just said there, where you said the second location's the hardest. And then, in a separate part of our conversation a few minutes ago, you talked about how you just recently did a brand refresh. Um, when you think about, and I think you started to allude to this, but when you started to think about why it was so difficult to go from 1 to 2 locations, I think you alluded to this idea that it had to do with like SOPs. You didn't maybe use that word, but it was like processes and things like that. Um, what did that? I know there's so it's anybody listening to this now is probably already down the rabbit hole looking up R2P and they're like, oh my gosh, look at all these locations and all that stuff. From the outside, they just see the overnight success of Josh, right? He crushed it overnight, right? But you're talking about a topic that I don't think very many people openly discuss. In a nutshell, though, like what did writing down processes look like back then? Did you guys was it a Google Doc? Like what did that look like for you guys? If we were to just time travel back now to whenever you opened that second office, what did it look like? You were probably frustrated. You're like, why the heck isn't this working the same way as the other location? Why is it not running this way when I'm not around or whatever? I imagine anyways. But then what did it look like in terms of like codifying this? Google Docs? What would the stack look like as you were kind of getting this thing figured out?
Early on, it was a mix of cheat sheets, so pen and a paper, and then Google Docs. For anybody who's opened a second office, you're automatically splitting 50% of your time. You're having a front desk that maybe you just figured out now be split between 2 people. You might have been the person training and teaching the person at the front desk. You onboarded all of the clinicians that were in front of you, teaching them the tools of the trade, putting yourself in a situation where it was very time burdensome on you because you required FaceTime, you required presence, you required Q&A that was in person, you required in-person conversations to coach and consult with that person through them optimizing whatever it is that their flow is. Now you're in two places and you're potentially having to do that. But when you're not there, because you're only there, let's say 25 hours a week, as opposed to your normal 50 hours at your original clinic, you quickly realize that you need stuff that people can reference.
Yeah.
You need stuff that people can go through that's a checklist. You need videos. For me, early on, it was whenever somebody reached out to me, I was writing on scratch paper. And I was like, I'm going to make sure that these people don't ever have to reach out to me again about X topics. So
And
anytime
you mean your employees?
employees, yep.
Yeah.
Anytime they reached out to me, and back then we didn't have Slack, so it was all text message or email. And when people are asking me how to do things or for clarity, I'm like, okay, this is clearly an opportunity for me. Instead of say, why can't you figure that out? It was always a what in the one-page cheat sheet, because we lived on
Yeah.
one-page cheat sheets that we were creating in Google Doc. What
Yeah.
about this document is not sufficient enough? Like I wanted you to get to this outcome, but you're building out these in Google Docs. It was very, very time relevant at that point in time because I was going through the operations section in the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program. And for anybody out there who has no business background formally, which I did not have, nothing in college at all, that was kind of like an on-the-job MBA for me. And it allowed me to look at process, map it from A to Z, potentially attach KPIs to it, attach feedback loops to it, and put it in at that time a relatively, primitive way for everybody to reference it. You're sharing a Google Doc, you're sharing folders. Now, fortunately, we have Trainual as a part of our stack from an onboarding standpoint and mentorship standpoint. It's got competency quizzes in there. You can know how long your staff has been in the platform, how many logins, what percentage they got on quizzes. It's a lot better position than a Google Google album that eventually became a nightmare to just organize and reference and put people through.
Well, and I admit this was a bit of a leading question because I've kind of, you've alluded to some of this stuff in your content. Maybe I'm just a weirdo, and anytime I'm going to meet somebody, I like go back through other content and try to like listen to it. And it's so fascinating. And I mean this with all the respect in the world, but like a lot of practice owners I meet, they almost always try to find the right tool first. And what was really interesting about, like, as I kind of went back through the Google Wayback Machine or the Wayback Machine to look at your stuff, you are not shy about saying like it was Google Docs, and like once you dialed it all in, then some tool like Trainual became much more useful, I think. I would almost go as far to say, let me just make the comment and then you can tell me if you totally disagree, which you by the way, are welcome to. I have a feeling that had you started with the tool first, I don't know that you would have been as successful, like, because the learning curve is still going to be there. But I think Google Docs, like the most important thing here is like Google Docs, you started out with like good enough and you dialed it in. And now you've got this like whole stack. And arguably, I could say the same thing I bet about Slack is that like Slack probably works really well today, but back in the day, text was probably a really good way to have that conversation initially because there is a constraint. You can't type a big block a wall of text and say, Josh, how do I do X or Y? Would you agree with that though? Like that people.
I would, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think for me, like to be honest, like I'm ready, fire, aim guy. Like I'm not going to sit there and aim and look for perfect. I'm okay with executing step one. Sometimes people like knowing what's step 10. Like before I even get moving, like I need to know what step 1 through 10 is. And they sit there and they're always at the starting line. And I think for us with Google Docs, I was like, well, something's better than nothing. And if I can put people in a position also, I mean, when we talk a lot about patient onboarding. How much do we really, talk about first impressions for your staff? It's like, okay, we're talking about hiring and recruitment, but the moment that they start with you, when you have certain levels of organization, when you prepare them for success, you're already in an industry where largely like you're not going to get an ROI on a clinician until what, maybe the Q4 of the first year they're with you, just kind of depending on how busy they are and what your unit economics are. So, I want them to hit the ground running. And that was through Google Docs. Eventually, like you mentioned, you get to a certain pain point, you get to a certain level of maturity, you can take on the costs. Not that Trainual is really that expensive,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we maximized our ability to put text in there and put screenshots because we were able to do a ton with just text and screenshots. And again, the most important question every single time somebody started, if something went wrong, we always are a thumbs first company instead of fingers. And it was always like, hey, what could we have done more through this one page cheat sheet? We clearly communicated what the outcome was. You didn't get to the outcome. What would you change? And those onboarding documents in Google Doc just continually were refined. And now it gets to a point in time where we've hired and onboarded enough people. Unless it's a brand new process, we're largely like, hey, at this point in time, this could be a people person issue. So,
How do you? I love this, by the way, because this is probably stuff that you take for granted, probably because you got it so dialed in. But as we think about practice owners that I meet, day in, day out throughout the country, like this is the stuff nobody ever talks to them about. They think they got to get like a better logo. And the ready, fire, aim analogy, I think, is the better way to go. And that tracks again, like a lot of my background's in the tech industry, but a lot of the principles are the same. Like if we all knew exactly how it was going to work, then we'd all run the same playbook and we'd have the same businesses. But unfortunately, we don't. So, okay, so you talked a lot about process. That clearly is important to you. The other thing it's very clear to me as I look at your content online and what you talk about and all that stuff, culture. I mean, you even at the beginning of this talked about how you did a recent brand refresh. So culture, you seem to be like that. That's probably one of your top two things. It's like process and culture or something like that. And by the way, I'm just reading from the outside. You and I met today, right? So would you agree with that? Is it process and culture as you are like your top two things maybe?
I would say three. I would say
Okay.
process, absolutely. Companies compete on process. I'm
Yep.
very competitive. I think people compete on process too. Without process, we are having the same conversations. We're having the same pain points. We're in the same place. And in situations like that, and I think it's just relevant to the healthcare industry as a whole, the word plateau and burnout, I think, start to go synonymous with one another. When we lack process, especially from a change standpoint, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. So
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, well, so I just want to make sure I get it clear. So that you said process culture. You said there were three: process, culture, and what was the
Clinical
last one?
excellence be the third one. Clinical excellence has to be a staple. I
Got
mean,
it.
that has
Yep.
to be something. I mean,
Yep.
for us, just the amount, even if I look at the cost of in services every year, and we do 46 1 hour in services every year with the entire company, like the time allotted there, the mini courses that we do on the weekend, the outside con ed that we have, the asynchronous materials, and the level one, level two mentorship that we have going throughout the course, like that is an absolute staple. And it is always an investment back in our people, but an investment back in our people will lead to outcomes that continue to speak for themselves. And then if we look at like marketing metrics, it's like, all right, well, my LTV is better. So therefore, most likely my CAC is going to be better. And my LTV to CAC ratio is better because my commitment to clinical excellence was better. And then at some point, my marketing budget I can turn down because we have this retention bucket and this word of mouth bucket that we would have, we would not have. Clinical excellence wasn't a thing here, and you're just churning people out. You got high churn, so that one is extremely important.
I
The
love
other
it.
two obviously preceded, but
I,
we wouldn't be here without clinical excellence.
I'm smiling, by the way, because it's not often that I get to hear a practice owner talking about CAC and LTV and all that stuff, which is amazing. We'll get to that in a moment here. With culture, again, don't share anything you don't feel comfortable sharing, but like you've grown your location so quickly now, right? And in a nutshell, though, w- what does onboarding when I think about you opening up a new location, just in some random location, and for people who don't know, you're in the DMV. Well, for people not in that area, like you and I live in the DC metro area, Virginia, Maryland, DC, or whatever. DMV. I don't know why we call it that, but anyway. So let's say you're opening up a new location in some Fairfax. That it doesn't matter, right? Clearly, you've got to hire somebody that's got the clinical experience. You're going to teach them the process. But from a culture standpoint, what does that look like? What does onboarding somebody look like at R2P right now from a culture standpoint? And, obviously, I'm sure that's a very nuanced answer, maybe, but I'm curious how you
Yeah,
think about that.
it's funny. So we were just talking about this more and more as we get to be a company that prioritizes two things, but has a minimum floor for the third thing. So we we ask certain questions to gauge psychological fit and culture fit. Those are non-negotiable. We're not of the belief that somebody can change their cultural alignment or their psychological alignment significantly, but we are of the mindset that at least if you have a certain bare minimum of skill from a clinical standpoint, that we can upskill you. It's harder to upskill you psychologically and culturally than it is to talk soft skills and hard skills as it relates to delivering a service. So I just think that's incredibly important. When you're going through the cultural side, it's important for you to be just very transparent, right? What are we talking about with our company totem, be greater than yesterday? What are we talking with mission vision? And what are we talking about with core values and how we potentially implement those core values? Asking people questions surrounding your core values is something that I think is highly underrated. You want to put people in a situation where we say, hey, feedback is a gift, is one of our four core values at Rehab to Perform. How would you say that you embody this in your regular practice from a professional and personal standpoint? So when you lead with core values, you integrate it into your interview process. It then becomes easier for you to communicate it as somebody's going through 0 to 90 onboarding. It becomes easier when you're also reinforcing it in High Five Fridays and Slack, where everybody is ideally doing things to shout out each other in a public forum, albeit, obviously it's not in person. We have a culture award, best teammate award every quarter. And then we do annual awards where these things are layered in to what we reward and what we recognize. And I think that if you lead with them on the front end from a hiring and attraction standpoint, it's part of your process, part of your onboarding process, part of your recognition and rewards process. It becomes really, really ingrained. And then beyond that, it's no secret that the standard has to be kept by the leaders in the room. If you do not have leaders who are culture keepers, who are not protecting the brand, so to speak, every single day, then you can succumb to gravity. And you can think of a lot of really, really good companies that as they scaled, we're on a pretty significant decline.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I love it, by the way. This is so great. Kind of I think this is somewhat related, but it might be switching gears. Recently, you posted something, I want to say I saw it on LinkedIn, maybe somewhere, but anyway, you posted some content somewhere about, I think you were basically talking about, I don't want to call them younger clinicians, but clinicians that are early in their career and, ways to help them pay off their debt. So I think you talked about financial burnout and things like that. And it's interesting when I think about that, I hadn't thought about that until you were talking about this now. And I'm like, you clearly care about the culture, you're growing the business, the numbers. But as I listen to you talk, I'm just really visual. So I see how I imagine you kind of see all these things as interconnected. So for anybody that has, and we'll find the link and put it in the show notes as well. But does that ring a bell, that post? If so, do you mind just talking about that? You talked about
Yeah,
clinicians and
I
burnout.
think 100%. I think you have young people that are looking for a way to hit the ground running. And I think they're looking to get into the working world, feel supported, feel listened to, feel like they're not just a cog on a wheel, feel like if I do X, Y, and Z, I can start to see the benefits. It doesn't have to be short term, because for anybody who thinks that anything's happening short term in life, regardless of the professional industry you're in, like, it's just not the reality. Buy into long term gratification, right? Delayed gratification. But you'll be in a situation where you start to pull people in. What is one of the jobs of our leaders when I talk about some of these recognition and reward strategies? How do you pull in new people to feel like they're a part of things? How do you stamp them in terms of being like the rest of the group. The more that you kind of get people to feel like they're a part of your tribe from a company standpoint, I think the more engagement you have. More engagement you have, the more you have people that are all rowing the boat in the same direction, and less bystanders that are maybe sitting there just holding their paddle out of the water and kind of wondering whether or not they're on the right boat. So if I take that to the financial side, you try to find ways to have people when they're going through onboarding, or you're going through a new calendar year, to have like, they want to feel like the company's operating their best interests. Onboarding in itself, an unbelievable 0 to 90, where somebody goes, wow, I am ready for success because of the amount of intent and organization that this company put forth for me. And then if you look at how we review things every year, it's like, how many people are doing the Secure 2.0 like this year, where if an individual had to choose, and we can argue about whether or not had is the right word, but if they chose to pay their student loans instead of doing the company 401k match, which for us is 4%, we match if you pay your student loans now because we're an early adopter. Like, we want to be first into all of these different tax bills that potentially come out. During the pandemic, there was something called the CARES Act, Section 127. You were able to allocate 5,250 of pre-tax dollars solely to student loans. Might not seem like much, but after a decade, it's 16 to 17 grand. That adds up if you're going to be somewhere. So your intent and organization, you're always retaining patients, but you're always retaining your staff. Your retention mechanisms are onboarding. Your retention mechanisms are continual. Your retention mechanisms could be long term, right? So it's important that you have all of these different things in place. And I think too often we maybe think about them more just from a patient standpoint because we're so busy on doing the thing, but we have taken a lot more, especially over the past 5 to 6 years, of like a team first mindset. If we take care of our team, the patients will be fine. Like, I'm very, very confident about that, but I'm not confident that if we had a customer service, or customer first or customer is always right mindset,
Yeah.
that we would be in the same situation. And don't tell Jerry Durham I said this, but him and I go back and forth on, I think, we largely say some of the same things, but it is something that we have found to be very, very important to having young people come in. Most of our team is millennial and Gen Z, hit the ground running, get pulled into things, get pulled into potential, now we've got a social media team that's largely in-house, full of people that are younger. We have people that have been out for less than 2 years that have helped us open offices. That has largely been as a result of that, recognition and reward mechanism in place.
And
Where
that's incredible for them too, right? Because
oh my
they
god,
probably wouldn't be able to do that anywhere else.
oh, they get a 15 to 20% profit share in addition to family healthcare premiums being paid for, which probably is not going to happen in a lot of situations. So, one of the things that we do feel very confident about is we have a very good entrepreneurial model. So for people who want to come in and hustle, and you like the company, you like the brand, you like what we're doing, now, you like where we're headed. Like, you get to come in and potentially open an office in your hometown. And a lot of times when we open up offices, it's where people grew up. I mean,
Yeah.
our last 2 offices that we just opened, you have people that are 5 to 10 minutes from where they grew up. They're hunting community relationships they've already had. They're just connecting the dots, the 7 layers of separation from mom, dad, siblings, old coaches, etc. And I think overall, the amount of work-life friction for them early, although they're hustling, is minimal because they see things working already. They're not spinning their wheels. The rubber hits the ground, and there's actually directionality to it instead of this sputtering.
Yep. Yep. You this is fascinating to me. Absolutely fascinating because uh it's not, you don't have to throw a rock very far to run into somebody that's like, oh, the boogeyman is the payers cutting rates again, or the boogeyman is this, or the boogeyman is that. And I know it sounds like almost Tony Robbins like, but the reality is that how you perceive the world tends to also be kind of how you behave in the world. And you strike me, again, I just met you today, but you strike me as like the kind of guy that's like super optimistic. But you're not like crazy thinking, you still have to look at the numbers and all that. And I think there's a lesson in there somewhere. I don't know what it is for anybody listening to it exactly yet, but you're running a highly profitable practice, what appears to be a highly profitable practice, because you're talking about loan pay. What did you call it? Like loan payment matches. You're talking about 401k matches. You're talking about stuff as if like a tech company would, you stop short of the ping pong tables, maybe that'll come soon. But I think there's something really fascinating about that. Um, for you in particular, I'm curious. Well, actually, let me ask you a question. You can totally skip and we'll edit this out. Clearly you've got a model that works, but I got to believe, just like any other entrepreneur, we try 10 things, 9 of them, didn't work, and the 10th one sticks. And then we move on and try 10 more things. Just in a nutshell, as you were growing your practice, whether it relates to culture, people, process, whatever, were there things that didn't work that you recall that you're like, oh man, why did I even try that? And if you want to pass on that, we can totally skip and we'll edit it out.
No, I think the biggest issue that I have is I am not an exceptional multitasker. And then I think that I do so much better when I am diving deep on things as opposed to being in a position where I think of the word breadth. I am a victim of shiny car syndrome sometimes. And I go, I could do that. I could do that. We could do that. When in all reality, and I've gotten so much better at it, I just look at things and I go, no, no, absolutely not. And I've gotten so much better at that because when I do that, it allows me to just stay in my lane and
Yeah.
just focus on the strategy of expanding R2P. I don't need to do this thing over here. I don't need to do that. Like, we're just not in a situation where, quite honestly, I've been able to pull myself out of enough things to potentially explore additional add-ons.
Yeah.
We're in a
Yeah.
situation, I mean, I'll be candid, like we're at about 15 million right now. Like we're at a good space. Like we're healthy. Things are going well for us in terms of like your debt to revenue ratios. We are single digit percentage. We are a very healthy company right now. And if we just keep hitting it, we'll get to an even healthier point. And maybe at some point, and I mentioned in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll have enough coverage over this DMV market where I'll start to look at things a little bit different.
Yeah.
But why add on anything different? Why not just like hammer your goal? Everybody gets so obsessed with diversification and 7 sources of income is what makes millionaires. Start to wonder like, was it actually the 7 sources or they got to that point and then they diversified? And I'm so much more like thinking the latter, where it's like somebody hammered one thing over and over and
That's
over
right.
and over.
That's right.
And then you have the ability to sprinkle yourself because you have a certain level of maturity and bandwidth.
Yeah.
And again, it got to back to the word like bandwidth and breadth. Like if I dive deep, I'll get where I want to get to that much quicker. And I've gotten, again, so much better, especially with a little one now and hopefully a growing family, like at just saying no.
Yeah. Well, that was the question I was going to ask, but you kind of walked right into it. Was, clearly your leadership style has changed. You talked about this idea of having to say no to things and all this stuff. In hindsight, where did most of that come from? Like I know you mentioned something earlier about a course you took. I apologize. I forget which one you mentioned,
Enrollment
but
program early on was really good. Yep.
yeah. So how,
You heard of
like, as you
it. Yeah.
grew as a CEO, a founder, CEO, that sort of thing, what what would you say to somebody else in your shoes 15 years ago now or 11 years ago now? Like what were the biggest drivers to you transitioning from like DPT to business owner to now CEO? I can sense how your thought processes have changed, but how would you think about it? What advice do you give people, or what practices or what classes or courses or things helped you grow?
Gosh, that's so good. I can go in a couple different directions here. Coursework wise, like your Small Business Development Center and SCORE are no brainers. Those are very, very easy. They're in almost every single community. A lot of the resources are free or next to nothing. You can get a free business mentor through SCORE. I still check in with my original one, Brandon Mason. Russell Teeter took me through the CEO Accelerator and the Growth Accelerator. That was with the SBDC. That was awesome. I took a whole day on how to like do lease negotiation. something I knew absolutely nothing about that still sticks out because I still feel like I walk into situations and I'm like, thank God I took
You're like
that course.
triple net. What the heck does that mean?
What?
That's right.
But so beneficial. Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses was awesome. For us, it was at the Carey School of Business at Johns Hopkins. Just the ability to have something that was an on-the-job MBA. I was able to implement stuff immediately. I've gotten into the Birthing of Giants program, fortunately through just affiliation with the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing companies. That's been beneficial. I'm actually going next week to the a gathering of giants, which is kind of like the next rung up. It's a way for me to just kind of do an annual check-in, 1 year from today plan, 3 year from today. A good, very, very good accountability peer group. And then outside of that, like I'm insanely curious. Like that is something that I've gone to South by Southwest. I've gone to Gym Con. Like I'm regularly going to stuff that looks like it has nothing to do with healthcare. And I'm like, no, this is all healthcare and not enough people are in these rooms that are trying to pull some of this stuff into healthcare. So you're familiar in the tech space and stuff, and it's like more people need to be in the tech world. More people need to be, especially tech world, fitness world. If we just looked at those two areas alone, we could pull tremendous influence to better off the healthcare industry. But I'm just always looking at ways of like tinkering and tweaking. And again, not to kind of bag on the healthcare system, but there's not a ton of like unique ideas that are directly coming from that space.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's probably some research people somewhere that can maybe say what I'm about to say more articulately. But one of the things I've noticed across the tech industry in particular, which we say tech industry, but every business is a tech industry, a tech company now. I would say you're a tech company. I mean, everybody is, right? And
Yep.
it's interesting that one of the patterns that's emerged over the last 15 to 20 years now is this idea that large outcomes, regardless of whether you're bootstrapped or private equity funded or venture funded, whatever, large outcomes rarely happen from within the industry. Typically, there's some sort of cross pollination that happens. It could be what you described, where you're kind of like going to these other conferences that seemingly don't look like they're relevant to R2P. But then there's also scenarios where you look at, and this is maybe a cliche, but you look at like Amazon. I mean, Amazon's a classic case study of like you start with books and then you expand into adjacent columns or lines of business. I mean, now they're a farm. They are a pharmacy as well. So it's kind of wild. But the point is that cross pollination is really really interesting. I know we're coming up on time here, and I want to be respectful. You must have I imagine you got a really busy schedule. Uh, on that topic, like, what does it look like? What does an average week for
Yeah.
you look like? Just high level.
I'm glad you asked that. In the beginning of the year, I always do an audit. And a lot of people are like, well, why didn't you do that at the end of the year? The end of the year is so heavy now on like kickoff prep, to be honest. Like I view the company kickoff every year as my probably single most important day. So I try to lock in for about 2 to 3 weeks prior to our company kickoff, which is the first Wednesday of every year, to make sure that my number one way of at least I think retaining our team is being as transparent as possible what went wrong in the past year and what's going to go right in the upcoming year. So now I'm into my audit where I'm auditing certain things, my time being one of them. And I want to put myself in a position where I continually am able to look at stuff and go, that doesn't move the needle enough. Why am I doing it? And I'm regularly asking that question more and more. I need to be in vision, strategy, and ideally find a way to continue to be, the chief resource officer. I need to
Yeah.
resource our
Yeah.
team, get in, get out, get in, get out. And I need to find ways to continue if we view our company as being this snowball that's rolling down the hill, continue to just be there enough just to pad it. But then I need to continue to be the person that ideally is allowing us to continue to grow. Like I'm going to
Yeah.
continue to be the growth catalyst. I'm going to continue to make the decisions that put us in a position to keep hitting home runs in markets, to make sure the team is successful, to make sure bigger picture partnerships are getting executed on, to make sure an ambassador program that we're rolling out is a big success. So anything that has the widest possible or biggest possible impact in the company ecosystem, that's what
Yeah.
I need to be doing. And if I'm not, I need to be asking somebody else why they're not taking this off my plate.
Yeah. Well, this is probably a good place to pin it because I could probably, if you're open to it, we'll probably try to drag you in, kicking and streaming to a part 2 and part 3 on this because one of the things that you just talked about there, I think is also not widely enough discussed. I think most people have this idea that the bigger you get, the easier it is to grow, as if there's some magical money tree that just appears when you get to 10 practices, 20, 30, or whatever in any industry. And the reality is, and you can disagree with me if you like, is growth actually gets more difficult as you grow. And, to put it more mathematically, when you're a small practice, let's say you're doing 500,000 a year, growing that business 20% is a lot easier than when you're at 15 million trying to grow 20%. And we'll save that for another episode. But I think the teaser there is that the bigger you get, the more ruthlessly you got to say no to things. And the things you say yes to must at least have the possibility of making enough, of a dent or move the needle enough to make it worthwhile. And I don't think that topic's discussed enough. Um, and also, I think it's really fascinating. You talked about SBDC and um, the business development centers and stuff like that, because it's like even stuff like lease negotiations, nobody ever talks about that. Like, how do you know you got a good lease versus a bad lease? It's I'm glad you're talking about this stuff. Um, we're gonna obviously like put links to you in the show notes and stuff like that. But for anybody that wants to learn more about you, where should they be going? Obviously, you're a busy guy, so should they get R2P's website? Where do you want people to go to learn more about you and the business?
Yeah, I would say for me, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. Those are the two platforms that I'm on the most. And then if you want to learn more about Rehab to Perform, just go to rehabtoperform.com. I would say the place that we're also probably the most engaging and entertaining is going to be on Instagram. So at Rehab to Perform on Instagram as well.
I love it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.